In the late 19th century, European powers were in a fierce scramble for control over the vast and resource-rich continent of Africa. This era, known as the Scramble for Africa, saw European nations vying to expand their empires by claiming African territories. The culmination of this imperialist competition was the Berlin Conference of 1884-1885, a meeting that would shape the future of Africa in profound and often devastating ways. Remarkably, not a single African representative was invited to the table where the fate of their lands and people was decided.
One of the most harrowing episodes of German colonial rule was the genocide committed against the Herero and Nama peoples in German Southwest Africa, modern-day Namibia, after the native Herero, pressured by land expropriation and forced confinement to reservations, rose in revolt in 1903, the German military responded with extraordinary brutality. In October 1904, General Lothar von Trotha issued orders to kill every male Herero and drive the women and children into the desert, a command that led to mass deaths by starvation, dehydration, and subsequent concentration camp internment.
Hello guys, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to this Facebook page and YouTube channel. Okay guys, without wasting much of your time, I would like to play you guys a video of how Africa was divided. The Berlin Conference that divided Africa without Africa leaders present in that conference. I'll play you guys this video to see what happened. See, this is what they hid from Africa. They take these things away from our history. That's why we don't have history in Nigeria. Some of you might have seen this video. Maybe some of you haven't seen it. But it would be nice if you share this video. It would be nice. Because Africa, we've seen a lot from the ends of this West. We've seen a lot. Just see how they buy our people like. But these same people will pretend to love us. Bro, Africa was divided. Africa was divided on our own behalf. These people, they were planning everything. Just take your time and watch this video. They will come back. I will beg you to share this video. Share this video. You see the reason why we need to support Ibrahim Traöre. This is the reason we need to support Ibrahim Traöre. Because this man is the only way now to restore Africa back. He's the only way. Watch, they'll come back.
In the late 19th century, European powers were in a fierce scramble for control over the vast and resource-rich continent of Africa. This era, known as the Scramble for Africa, saw European nations vying to expand their empires by claiming African territories. The culmination of this imperialist competition was the Berlin Conference of 1884-1885, a meeting that would shape the future of Africa in profound and often devastating ways. Remarkably, not a single African representative was invited to the table where the fate of their lands and people was decided. Background: The Scramble for Africa. By the late 1800s, European nations were competing for influence and resources across the globe. Africa, with its vast mineral wealth, fertile lands, and strategic locations, became a primary target for colonial expansion. Prior to the Berlin Conference, European incursions into Africa were mostly limited to coastal trading posts and a few isolated settlements. However, as technological advancements made inland exploration more feasible, the race to claim African territories intensified. This unregulated competition led to conflicts between European powers, as well as brutal exploitation and violence against African communities. To avoid direct military confrontations among themselves and to formalize their claims, the European powers sought to establish rules for the colonization of Africa. The Berlin Conference, dividing a continent. In November 1884, representatives from 14 European countries and the United States gathered in Berlin at the invitation of German Chancellor Otto von Bismarck. The purpose of the conference was to regulate European colonization and trade in Africa. Over the course of several months, these diplomats and leaders carved up the African continent into territories that would be controlled by the various European powers. The key decisions made at the Berlin Conference included principle of effective occupation. European powers were required to establish authority in the areas they claimed. This meant building infrastructure, establishing administration, and maintaining a military presence. Free trade zones. The Congo Basin and Niger River regions were designated as free trade zones where all European nations could operate without interference. The Congo Free State. King Leopold II of Belgium was granted personal control over the Congo Free State, a decision that would lead to one of the most brutal regimes in colonial history. As a result of the conference, borders were drawn with little regard for the existing ethnic, cultural, and linguistic divisions among African peoples. Entire communities were split between different colonial powers, while rival groups were forced together under artificial borders. The European powers prioritized their own economic and political interests, disregarding the complex social and political landscapes of the African continent. The absence of African voices. One of the most glaring injustices of the Berlin Conference was the complete exclusion of African representatives. The decisions made during the conference were based entirely on European perspectives, with no consideration for the wishes or rights of the African people. The conference essentially legitimized the theft of African land and resources, setting the stage for decades of exploitation and oppression. African leaders and communities were left to deal with the consequences of decisions made thousands of miles away, with no say in the process. The arbitrary borders drawn by the European powers would lead to numerous conflicts and tensions in the following decades, many of which continue to affect Africa today. Aftermath and legacy. The Berlin Conference had a profound and lasting impact on Africa. By 1914, nearly 90% of the continent was under European control. The arbitrary borders and colonial administrations imposed by the European powers disrupted traditional societies, economies, and governance structures. The legacy of these borders can still be seen in the modern map of Africa, where many of the political boundaries established during the Berlin Conference remain in place. The exploitation of Africa's resources and people during the colonial period led to immense suffering and stunted the continent's development. The Berlin Conference is often cited as a symbol of the injustices of colonialism and the destructive impact of European imperialism on Africa. A continent divided. The Berlin Conference of 1884 to 1885 stands as a stark reminder of the power dynamics that have shaped global history. The division of Africa, without the presence of a single African voice, illustrates the deep disregard for the sovereignty and humanity of African peoples by the European powers. The conference set the stage for decades of colonization, exploitation, and conflict, the effects of which are still felt across Africa today. The story of the Berlin Conference is not just a historical event. It is a crucial chapter in understanding the complex legacies of colonialism and the ongoing struggles for self-determination, justice, and unity in Africa.
The late 19th century scramble for Africa saw European powers scrambling to claim vast territories on the African continent. While Britain and France built extensive and long-lasting colonial empires, Germany's venture into imperialism was marked by a late entry, significant structural limitations, and brutal policies that ultimately led to a far more modest colonial footprint and a legacy of controversy. Before unification in 1871, the various German states were primarily concerned with internal affairs and European power dynamics. Under the leadership of Otto von Bismarck, whose primary achievements lay in unifying Germany and maintaining a balance of power on the continent, the German focus was not on overseas expansion. Bismarck's pragmatic approach even led him to disdain colonial ambitions, famously remarking, "I am no man for colonies." Nonetheless, increasing public pressure and the lure of international prestige eventually compelled Germany to enter the race for colonies, despite its late start compared to its European rivals. By the time Germany began acquiring territories in the 1880s, much of Africa had already been partitioned among other European powers. Initially, colonial pursuits in Germany were driven by enterprising merchants and adventurers rather than a coherent state policy. However, a significant shift occurred during the reign of Kaiser Wilhelm II, who embraced the aggressive Weltpolitik, a policy designed to secure Germany a place in the sun through expansive overseas ventures and a formidable navy. This policy marked a decisive break with Bismarck's Realpolitik and fueled ambitions that, by then, were already behind the more established colonial enterprises of Britain and France. Germany's delayed foray into colonialism brought with it inherent disadvantages. Unlike Britain and France, which had long established naval traditions and administrative structures for overseas governance, Germany had to build these capacities from scratch. Its colonial ventures were initially managed through chartered companies that struggled with the complexities of tropical agriculture and the logistics of long-distance governance. Economic constraints, limited experience in administering far-flung territories, and a lack of robust maritime infrastructure all contributed to a relatively modest and short-lived colonial presence. One of the most harrowing episodes of German colonial rule was the genocide committed against the Herero and Nama peoples in German Southwest Africa, modern-day Namibia. After the native Herero, pressured by land expropriation and forced confinement to reservations, rose in revolt in 1903, the German military responded with extraordinary brutality. In October 1904, General Lothar von Trotha issued orders to kill every male Herero and drive the women and children into the desert, a command that led to mass deaths by starvation, dehydration, and subsequent concentration camp internment. Over the course of just a few years, estimates suggest that tens of thousands of Herero and Nama people perished, marking this conflict as one of the first genocides of the 20th century. The extreme violence not only decimated indigenous populations, but also stained Germany's imperial legacy, contributing to long-term debates over racial policies and human rights that would later echo in the horrors of the Nazi era. By the time Germany attempted to stake its claim in Africa, Britain and France had already established extensive and contiguous colonial empires. Through decades of diplomatic negotiations, treaties, and a head start in building naval and administrative infrastructures, these powers secured the most economically and strategically valuable territories. The diplomatic delineations of borders during the Berlin Conference and subsequent agreements often left Germany with less desirable and more fragmented regions. This competitive disadvantage was compounded by Germany's late entry, as much of the good territory had already been claimed. World War I proved to be the final blow to Germany's colonial ambitions. With the outbreak of war in 1914, Allied forces quickly seized German colonies. Although a few isolated German military units held out, such as in German East Africa until the war's end, the overall collapse of the German colonial empire was swift and decisive. The Treaty of Versailles in 1919 formally stripped Germany of all its overseas possessions, redistributing them as League of Nations mandates under British and French supervision. This post-war settlement ensured that Germany would never again be a colonial power, cementing its limited role in Africa. Germany's brief and tumultuous colonial venture offers important lessons about the dynamics of imperial competition. Its late start, coupled with structural weaknesses and a reliance on brutal methods of control, meant that Germany's colonial empire was never as vast or enduring as those of Britain and France. The legacy of violence, most notably the Herero and Nama genocide, continues to provoke debate and demands for historical reckoning. Moreover, the failure to secure lasting colonial territories influenced German national identity, contributing to a historical narrative that remains cautious about overseas ambitions. In contrast, the extensive and lasting nature of British and French colonial holdings has left enduring imprints on the political, social, and economic landscapes of Africa. Germany's limited success in the scramble for Africa can be attributed to a confluence of factors: a delayed entry into the colonial race, structural and strategic limitations such as an underdeveloped navy, and administrative inexperience, fierce competition from more established colonial powers, and the devastating impact of its own brutal policies, epitomized by the Herero and Nama genocide. The swift seizure of its colonies during World War I and their subsequent redistribution sealed Germany's fate as a secondary player in African imperialism. Ultimately, Germany's experience in Africa reflects not only the competitive nature of European colonialism, but also the profound human costs of imperial ambition.
Wow, guys, you watched those videos. You saw what this people did to Africans. This is what they hide from Africans. They don't want Africa to know their history. What Germans, Belgium, UK, in short, what the Europeans did to Africans. Since 18th centuries, they've been buying Africans. Now it's time for us to get back our continent. They want to repeat history again. Bro, we are not going to allow history to repeat itself this time. We're going to defend our land. Defend Ibrahim Traöre. Yeah, we're going to protect him. Please guys, share this video. German did a lot to Africans, but they are not saying it here. Even in their school, they are not teaching it. They don't want Africans to know what they did to us. That's why they took away history from our country. They don't study history in Africa. I will end this video for now. Please share this video, please. Share this video. As you do so, God bless you. See you guys in my next video. Stay safe, guys, and bye-bye.